My great pleasure to be here today again. And we are going to record the meeting. So if you realize at the end of the talk that there is something that you want to just remove from the video, just let us know. So no concern. If you want to talk about something and you are concerned that, okay, that will be kind of video recorded, just let us know. We will remove those pieces from the video. And we realize over time that, I mean, we have something like 30, 40 people here right now, and there might be something like 400 people that can see the video kind of in another time, and that might be helpful for people. So let's move forward with this question. Have you ever experienced being in a situation like this? Feeling that kind of the night before a really large exam, in a really terrible condition, you just feel that, wow, I have just finished something like 20% of the material that I was supposed to read, and everything is awful. So you just feel that it sucks. And it's something like 10 p.m., and you feel exhausted, and you have the exam 10 a.m. next day. You just feel that, wow, what should I do right now? Have you ever experienced that? Anybody who has experienced that before? Okay, good. If one of your friends just come in and say that, okay, I have a pill that would help you remain focused till tomorrow morning before exam, and just be able to kind of do your studies and get a really good score at the end of the day, would you take that pill or not? So I'm not going, we are video recording, so you can just say, I mean, no or whatever, but just think about yourself on that scenario, in the real scenario. So put yourself in that specific scenario, thinking about what are you going to do, and what are you going to kind of think about that specific deal. Okay? So if you have that option of having a pill, and so let's think that I'm going to take the pill. Okay, so convince me not to take the pill. Who is going to? I've already kind of taken the pill, so I already have the pill. So I'm looking for a bottle of water to swallow my pill. So what do you? And you realize that I'm going to do that. So try to convince me not to do that. Who is going to convince me? Or everybody agrees that we should. I mean, we should do that. So if you agree that, if you think that you are going to kind of stop me, go ahead. What do you want to? How are you going to convince me not to swallow that?
Although your friend may have given you, has given you the pill, you don't know what's in it. You don't know about the side effects. Your heart might stop before you even take the exam. So that might not be safe.
If I'm sure that I know the friend, he or she has done that several times, and I know that's going to work. So I'm not concerned that that is something that's going to stop my heart. And even I basically checked that that material inside is not going to basically kill me for that night. So I'm going to survive, and I'm going to do the exam. How are you going to convince me not to do that?
Does it have addictive qualities?
I don't know.
No. Don't do it.
But I'm going to, go ahead.
Well, if you take this pill to make you super productive, then you're kind of denying those urges that you're having from your body to get sleep or to get rest and like rejuvenate and repair. And so even though you might be doing successful in your own terms of getting your exams done, you're really losing productivity in terms of your health.
But in reality, I'm going to do it just one time, just for tonight. And my exam is really important for me. Should I do it? The exam is really important, so this is just one time.
Is it fair for you to do that? Is that academically honest?
Okay, so that is another dimension. We can start to think about that. Let's think about fairness, something like 10 p.m. when you have a really, really important exam and you are exhausted. So I don't know, no comment to that. So let's go to the other kind of areas. What are the other things that you try to convince me not to do that? What are the other, I mean, do you have any suggestion, anything trying to convince me not to do that. Or you're convinced to do it as well, joining me. What do you want to do?
There could be things like, even though you check the ingredients of it and you think that it's safe for you, you could have a negative reaction to it based on your own biochemistry.
We know that for every single medication that we take, there might be a side effect, but we know the side effects, and meanwhile we take the medications because there is a positive effect as well. And the exam is really important for me. So I know that there is, the odds of kind of side effect would be there, but I know that the exam is really important. So just put yourself in the exact scenario and think about, okay, it's 10 p.m., you are exhausted, the exam is really important to you, you feel terrible, and everything sucks. And that, in this context, what do you do? Take the pill, okay. What else?
Just drink some caffeine.
Just drink some caffeine. Is it going to work till 10 p.m. to morning and then doing the exam? Well, okay, so that is a scenario. Okay, let's move more from that. If I want to simplify the brain functions, all the brain functions, if I want to simplify them in 3 major functions, I can simplify them in 3 functions. One is about how do you feel, how you experience bad feelings, how you experience good feelings, and how you control yourself. These are basically 3 major brain functions. How do you kind of experience motivation, being in a really good mood, and how do you experience stress, negative emotionality, being depressed, being kind of frustrated, and how you control your emotional impulses. These are basically 3 major categories of brain functions, and many other brain functions are under these brain functions. If I want to kind of add some other parts to these major dimensions, there are some other functions that are between these 3, or some of the kind of, let's say, metacognitive functions or social cognitive functions that could be added to this framework. But these 3 are going to be 3 really important major functions inside your brain, okay? So we are going to discuss about these 3 functions in the next step as well. Let's think about happiness, the positive side of the brain functions. How do you feel happiness, and how we define happiness, how we can experience happiness, how we can increase happiness in our life, okay? So, do you think that this guy is happy? How do you kind of rate his happiness from 0 to 100? 70? What else? 60?
Should we have more context?
No, just this is yeah. I'm going to give you more context, but with this, what you are already reading from his face.
Okay. Probably like 75.
75, okay. Good. He is my son, Amir, and he's 5 years old. He has a severe autism, and he's almost mute, so he cannot talk at all. And when people ask me about what do you think about him in long term, what is your plan? Because he probably cannot live independent to us in long term. I usually tell people that I really like him to be happy. So I'm defining my goal for him in terms of what I'm going to do for him. Right now he's receiving something like 8 hours of therapies. 2 hours of speech therapy and other kind of different sort of therapies that he's receiving. And sometimes I'm thinking, okay, how can I make the balance in terms of the long-term goal of happiness? And you can see that how happiness could be a really complex function. How do you define that, being happy? And that is a really, really complex function. And even when we want to measure happiness in a really global level, defining what are the countries that are the happiest countries. And you have heard about that. And you know that US is not most of the time we are not really in a really good kind of position. And during the last couple of years, even with the economy growth that we're experiencing right now, our position in the world in terms of the happiness is declining several steps during the last couple of years. But even how we are measuring the happiness in the global level is a complex phenomenon. So we know that happiness is a complex process. And meanwhile, we know that there are some sources of happiness and pleasure and joy in our life. What are the main sources of happiness and joy in your life? What are the things that make you really feel good? Food. Probably the most legitimate ones, okay?
Interactions with other people.
Interactions with others, people. What else? Hobbies. What else? Pets. What else?
Yeah, just time to rest, relaxation.
Relaxation.
Say achievements.
Achievements. So there are different things that make you happy. And as, what was your name? Massey. As Massey mentioned, food could be probably one of the most important way of pleasure, okay? If I'm going to offer you a hot brownie, just fresh out of oven, it's really, really good. If you want to kind of rate how much you like to have this brownie right now, from 0 to 100, what would be your rating? 100, Matthew. Okay, what else? 10? Okay, what else?
About 70.
70. On the back.
0.
0? Okay, good. On the other side. How much would be your rating? 80, okay. So we have people who are really interested. We can bring the brownie in and just not to give to those who are 10 and 0. So that is, then we can see their faces, how they are really happy or not. So if we provide with more brownies and kind of even more kind of appealing brownies and some really fluffy chocolate cakes that are fantastic, or from the best pastries in the town. Or there might be people who like to have, let's say, French fries. Okay, who is voting for fries? From 100? 90, okay. At the end? 70, okay. No. 0, okay. Good. How do you feel? When do you talk about food craving? When do you feel food craving? How do you experience food craving? What are the things happening inside your body, and what are the things happening inside your brain when you experience craving to this? Salivating, what else?
You think about it a lot.
Think about it a lot. What else?
Just like starts to grumble.
What else? I'm going to ask every single person.
You might have the feeling to go seek out food. Hunger.
What do you suggest? What would be your feeling, or what is happening inside your brain?
In my brain? I gotta think something else. I probably am imagining. Probably my olfactory senses are kind of kicking in because I'm thinking about smells.
Okay, good.
It's kind of what I was going to say. I get hungry.
Okay, what else?
Start walking towards food.
Okay, so you do start to sprint. What else?
I guess I desire food.
How do you define your desire? How do you feel your desire? How do you feel that you have a desire for that?
It's like nothing else sounds good except for that. Like you're hungry, and you're like, oh, I could eat this instead, but you're like, no.
That is the only thing I like.
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
I would start trying to figure out how I could get to the food.
To the
If I could afford it, so I could drive there.
Okay, so
Start weighing
doing
out
lots of executive planning how you are going to make it. Okay, what else?
I need ketchup.
Okay, good, good. What else?
I would like imagine myself eating it.
Okay, so you start to imagine. Any good memory that you have with fries?
They're crunchy.
They are crunchy, and you just can even feel the texture in your mouth. Okay. What was the color of the plate or the bowl of the French fries? It seems that there are people who haven't seen the plate, right?
I don't remember.
That is, I mean, when you have attention on something specifically, you might just lose everything that's around. So you have a sort of attentional bias. So there are specific cognitive processing associated with the kind of the craving that you have for food. So there are many things happening inside the brain when we feel food craving, okay? What we do in the Laureate Institute for Brain Research, we can just make a map from your brain when you are seeing these pictures. So I can put you inside the scanner and show you these drug-related pictures or food-related pictures, and then I can see what is happening inside your brain. And your brain would be totally different between different kind of each one of you. So I can show that person A would have activation in amygdala, and person B would not have any activation in amygdala. So you have really different responses. As you are right now reporting, you have different experiences with the food. But we can do the mapping of what is happening inside your brain. So there are some specific circuits in your brain that would be responding to food. And if I can stop these circuits to respond, you would not have any food craving. If I stimulate them more, you have more food craving. So there are some specific circuits inside the brain that are involved, okay? When we want to talk about drug of abuse or drugs that are associated with drug addiction, we have basically two major classes of drugs. One class would be narcotics and opioids and sedatives, and the other would be stimulants. Stimulants like, what are the drugs that are stimulants?
Caffeine.
Amphetamine. What else? Caffeine could be cocaine. So meth, cocaine, kind of, and in the lower level, let's say, kind of the caffeine and the other things that are essentially stimulants. So we have narcotics and stimulants, okay? Let's see. This guy, his name is Adam. Okay, Adam has never experienced using any drug, and somebody is going to sell him a glass pipe and a small piece of meth to use, okay? What do you see in Adam's face right now? Indecision. What else?
Skeptical.
Skeptical. What else? Apprehension. What else? Confusion. What else? Concern. What else?
Weariness.
What else?
Weariness.
Worriness. What else? What else? Do you see that he is also going to do that? So his hand is still kind of in a sort of kind of ready to do that. Okay? Okay. Let's think that he decides to use the drug, and the drug would go inside the body. The major target for the drugs is the brain, so we know that these are going to change the brain. We call this character, he's a, what type of character he is? A dealer, or just wanted to get sure that you kind of can characterize his character. What type of person he is? He's a thief, right? It makes sense, right? So he's a thief. So we say that, okay, this guy is giving this gentleman a key. And what does this key do? this guy would start to rob something or steal something from Adam. And what is he stealing? He's stealing networks or brain networks. So we call him thief of brain networks. So he would basically steal some networks inside the brain. What are the networks that he is interested to steal? The networks that are related to food craving. So the networks that you use to really like to have food. Okay? So he basically took those networks in control for himself. So basically these networks now would be in control by this guy. Okay? Can we provide a name for him? Do you suggest a name for him? Any specific name? You're one of your enemies. Suggest one name.
Harold.
Harold, okay. So this guy is Harold, okay. So Harold is basically stealing those networks and would remain in the brain. And Harold is right now using those networks on his own benefits. Adam would be the same person. Basically, when you start to kind of have your brain networks in the hands of Harold, there is no change in the physical characteristic of the person. The person is doing the same job for years. There are some specific kind of signs that the brain is not working as it was working before. So Adam now has attention towards things that are not usually really attractive to others. And there would be a level of attachment to anything that is related to drug. So he would start to get dependent to drug. And when we talk about dependency, it's about a sort of a love relationship that he starts to make. So he starts to experience craving. But the craving could be happening not only in the exposure of the, let's say, anything that would be related to the drug, but any time that people would start to have a stress, they start to have the level of craving. So exactly like food, sometimes you just like to have food when you see the food. But there are occasions that you feel stressed, and when you feel stressed, it seems that you like to have something. And that is the kind of the experience that people have. Those networks would work for drug as well. So people would start to feel that, okay, now I like to kind of use a specific drug. And then we have drug craving instead of food craving. And then Harold basically would control everything that is happening in Adam's life. And then the problem would start with more, let's say, physical harm to the body. So we want to give you a better idea about how drug would change the brain. I should ask you to think about drugs in 2 dimensions. One dimension is about harm. Most of the people think that when we are talking about a specific drug, like the pill that we discussed early today, is about the harm of that pill. So if you take the pill, your heart might stop. If you take the pill, there would be, let's say, 100 neurons in your brain would die. But the reality is, the harm is not the major problem. So those drugs that are harmful, they are not making a huge level of problem. The problem starts with drugs that they can make you dependent. And meanwhile, they can have harm. Why? Because then when they make you dependent, you have craving to them, and you repeatedly use them, and then the harm would accumulate over time. So this is the graph that we have for different drugs in 2 dimensions: dependence and harm. Where is nicotine? Or let's say, as you can see here. So when we talk about nicotine, nicotine is really high in the dependence rating, but it's lower in the harm compared to the, other more harmful drugs. When we talk about something like heroin or meth, there are drugs that are really harmful and also their dependency level would be high. Most of the time when we talk about drugs, we think about their harm. But in reality, drugs that are harmful, let's say things like ketamine, or even things like LSD, ecstasy, those things that we have them here. If the dependency level is low, most of the time they do not make really huge problems. They can kill few people in the parties or in places. But we do not see many patients with significant problems with these drugs. They are really harmful. If you take them, they can kill in the parties, they make lots of problems. But people would not do them, let's say, every day or every week, and then they can make a huge problem. The problem is with drugs that they have a really high dependency rate. So the problem is going to be huge with these drugs. So let's say every 100 patients that we see in clinic right now, there might be something like 1% with dependency to LSD or other drugs. They are still really harmful, but when we have drugs that they have higher dependency level, they would be problematic more. When we have a person who has never experienced using drugs, okay, he would be here. What do you call this? Slippery slide, okay? So he's on the top of the slide, okay? When you are in this position, you can decide whether to go or not. I'm not sure, have you ever tried those really huge slides in water parks or in places? And some of them are really huge. And sometimes when you are in the first place, you just think, okay, that will be fine. But in the middle, you would just curse yourself. Why did this to me? What did I do this to myself? So I'm not sure, have you ever experienced that? When you are in the and the problem is that when you are in the middle, you cannot do anything. You should just wait to see what is going to happen, because when you go into the slide, that's it. You go one step by step, just go down, and you cannot just stop the process. And the problem with drug is just, it's just going to go down and down and down, and the problem is going to get. So the problem is not about losing 100 neurons when you take a pill the night before the exam. The problem is when we have 100 billion neurons. So 100 neurons for a really important exam is not going to be a big problem. The problem is when you take one, then you would be in the sliding slope. And then the next one and the next one and the next one. And it would get really hard. How it can get hard? You can see that how it's really hard when you want to stop yourself and not to eat something that is really delicious. Okay? You can experience that. This is really hard. You cannot experience drug craving right now, so you don't have any feeling about what does it mean to have craving to drugs. But you already have the feeling of craving to food, right? The craving to drugs would be 100 times more potent compared to the craving to food. And that is huge. So let me give you more ideas about that. And those who are using basically going down and up and up, down and up, and that's the kind of the circle that would be happening. We know clearly right now about the neural circuits that are involved in this process in terms of when you use the drug, just feeling good for a while, networks are involved in feeling good, and then networks that then you kind of use that for a while, then you start to have withdrawal, and then areas that are related to withdrawal would be involved, and then you start to just seek for drug and just try to see, okay, when you feel hungry, as you have mentioned, when you feel hungry, the next step would be just trying to see, okay, how I'm going to find that specific thing, and how should I drive? How can I find a drug and use a drug? So then your control would work, not to control yourself, not to use drug, but to control to see how can you get the drug. So these three major functions I mentioned in the first place, they would just work for this circle. And people use again and again and again, and that's the problem. And then over the time, when people start to kind of use the drug, the first steps would be, okay, feeling euphoric, then feeling good, and then people use not to just get dysphoric. So there is no euphoria afterwards. You just try not to get dysphoric. And in reality, it should be something like this, because it just goes down without control. So it's the process. And then people would end up in this feeling of just being overwhelmed by the problem of drugs in their life. And that is the problem that we are facing right now in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I see many patients that they have the same problem, being exactly in a situation like this. Sometimes they try to avoid any cure related to drug, but it's really hard. And even when you close everything around you, it would be just inside your brain. So it's really hard to avoid memories or all the attachments that they have with this beloved drug. And that is what they have experienced. When you see the picture like this, what do you feel? Just disgusting, yeah? I mean, or nothing. You just don't have any feeling. But when a drug user see a picture like this, compared to what you have been feeling when you have been seeing those fries, okay, they have a craving 100 times higher. And the first time that I experienced that, I was a medical student, and for my kind of thesis project, I was working on kind of drug cure activity. So I asked a few kind of heroin users, what are the pictures, what are the scenes that if you see would be triggering drug craving for you. So, and I took a kind of camera and I went to different places. Some of them even, they told me that if you go to, let's say, restrooms in the parking places or in the kind of the parks, these are the places that are kind of that makes me feel craving. So I took pictures from those places and I mounted them on a wall, and then I asked people to just go inside the room and rate the pictures in terms of how much craving they can make for them, and from 0 to 100. The first experience that I had with that experiment was that most of the patients were sitting in the middle of the room without being able to walk back again out of the room. So they were not able to stand on their feet after seeing these pictures. And they have been feeling that, okay, we cannot do anything right now. You have been looking to these pictures, overwhelmed with these kind of feeling of craving. And this was, I knew that it's going to be effective, but not at this level. That they have nausea, vomiting in the room. It was terrible. I was not expecting that huge level of experience. And even we had some posters in our center that has been prepared by some of the kind of the drug control agencies. They had some pictures related to drugs and saying that, okay, you are the smarter person, you are not going to use this drug, that kind of stuff. And I was working in the kind of addiction treatment center, and I don't know why they have mounted those posters in the addiction treatment centers, because some of the patients were basically trying to tear them apart and just take the pictures related to drug and take the pictures with themselves. So they have, it's something like a pornography, but much more potent and kind of effective on people. I had a patient, I clearly remember him, when I asked him to do, because he was in kind of something like 6 months absent, and he was helping us in arranging some of the studies that we have been doing. And I asked him to go a place and buy something for us and bring back and go with metro, with subway. And he told me that he cannot go to Subway. And I asked him why, and he told me that there is a poster in Subway right now that a really nasty guy with a really bad face is injecting a drug in kind of a teen's kind of arm and saying that, okay, addiction is a really bad thing, try to avoid addiction, something like that. And he was telling me that whenever I see that picture inside the metro station, I just need to go and use drugs. So I started to avoid to go to Subway. And so you can see that how these people would just have the craving. And you cannot see that on that poster when you see it as a normal person. But the person who is a drug user, they can feel that and they can see the problem. I had a patient who was a professor in physics. And he was telling me that he was using kind of meth just for being focused and write his scientific papers. And he told me, I mean, he was kind of explaining the problems that he had. He told me he realized the problem at one night, something like 2 a.m. in the morning. He realized himself being in pajamas in the downtown without any shoes, having some notes in his hand, trying to find a dealer to sell him meth. And he just really was explaining that it was and then he decided to come to treatment and kind of seek for treatment. So people would start to even behave in a way that they cannot understand why they are doing something like this. So we know that is a really kind of sometimes tough decision because drugs could be appealing for some people in terms of reducing their negative affect or increasing their positive affect, okay? And especially when we talk about specific scenarios that people are in something like the middle of the night, they are exhausted, they are in a stressful condition. It's a really tough decision, okay? But in reality, that is the reason that we have 20 million people with not just substance use, with substance use disorder, I mean addiction, real addiction. We have 20 million people in US with drug addiction. Let's say in a class of 50, 4%. And that is huge. That is the huge problem. And something like 10 million of them would also experience other mental health disorders like depression, anxiety. And that's the problem that we have. And yet it starts from this really tough decision that there are many people who would just go and use drugs in these conditions. And that's the problem that we have right now. And some people feel that, okay, I have a really strong willpower. If I take this medication, or if I take this pill for tonight and I do the exam well, I'm in control. I can do it just 1 time, or 2 times, or 3 times, or just in the season of exam. But in reality is, I mean, they feel that they are really in control, but that is not the case. Because there are brain areas that are involved in this process that make people really disabled in a way that they cannot even understand why they are behaving like this. Of course, there are hopes for those who have drug problems, but most of the time, people come to treatment when they are really kind of destroyed, their life, everything that they have is destroyed. And they come to treatment 6 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years after starting the process. Because in the first couple of years, they know that they are just going down, but nobody realized because they are using their resources. And then they ended up with a really bad situation. How can we help these people? So being able to help these people, we started to develop a method to be able to see what is happening inside their brain to help them to change the processes inside the brain when they have drug craving. For being able to do that, we had to detect networks inside their brain that are involved in drug craving. So we showed people these pictures that I showed you, drug-related pictures and neutral pictures, and subtract brain activations when we kind of show these pictures to them. And you can see that this is the main effect of drug versus, these are the areas in the brain that are involved when you see drug-related pictures compared to neutral pictures, okay? And we can clearly see how, for example, these two areas in what we call inferior frontal gyrus, how they are activated when they are exposed to drug-related cues, and we can clearly measure the level of signal that we have in these areas over time when we expose them to different drug cues. So we have a complete control about what is happening inside the brain. And then we developed a model, we call it an easy core model, about the brain functions that are involved in the feeling of craving, okay, and how different parts of the brain that are involved. And then we started to kind of develop a treatment based on this model. Let me just give you a kind of a simpler way of explaining the model. So when we talk about things related to eating, we have the environment. We have the cues in the environment. You just pass by a pastry and you see that brownies in the shelf. And then your attention would be involved in seeing those really nice brownies. And then you have lots of really good memories about that. You start to do a saliency processing. Should I do that? Should I take few kind of pieces of that? What will be the consequences? So you start to think about, am I going to do that or not? And then you start to have what we call interoceptive feeling. It's about what do you feel inside your body, and you just start to feel the food craving. And then you would be in the control trying to see, should I do that or not? Should I control my craving? Should I buy the brownie or not? And then you would respond. Okay, these are the major brain functions that would work together to end up with using or not using the food that we are discussing about. And it could be true for drug as well. So we know that these brain functions are involved in drug craving. So how can we help people to change these functions in a way that they can control their drug craving? Because drug craving is a really big monster in the field, and we need to see how can people defeat this monster. So we developed a new treatment that we call neurocognitive empowerment for disease or for addiction treatment, NEAT. It has 16 sessions of education and training for those who are suffering from drug addiction. And we start from simple cognitive functions like attention and memory, and then we go to the more complex ones, the function that we discussed today: interoception, negative attention, positive attention, prospective memory. So, and we teach them to add these functions together and have an understanding about what is happening inside their brain, to use their brain to control their craving. And we have educational material, we have games about those functions, trying to help them to control their craving. We have recently received a really good fund from Oklahoma Center for Advancement of Science and Technology. And right now we are running a trial with this method in different addiction treatment centers in the town, trying to see how we might be able to help patients. And we do brain imaging before and after the treatment to see how their brain processes, how their brain networks would be different after doing the intervention. We developed some posters from these educational materials with cartoons, because then we can better communicate with patients about these complex brain functions. And we put these posters out, and in just last 2 years, people across the world started to translate the material to other languages. Right now, we have them in 12 different languages, and something like 6 other languages is just adding up to and it's just not simple people kind of translating them. Just experts in the addiction treatment centers across the world. For example, Ministry of Health in Korea, in South Korea, they have translated the material and they distributed that in 700 clinics across South Korea. So, made in Tulsa material right now is using in all addiction treatment clinics in South Korea. So people are starting, right now they are using that in many places across the world. And that is really kind of interesting that people are looking for these materials across the world. Now we realized that the first version was just male version, so we developed a completely feminine version for patients who are from women. So to be able to engage them to the program as well. And as I told you, we have these networks. Last session I discussed with you about there are some other potentials. For example, we develop new brain stimulation technologies to be able to target those areas. So we discussed about those technologies last session, how we might be able to target those networks inside the brain, and how we might be able to deliver current to those specific abnormal functioning brain areas, and how we might be able to modulate them. And this is one of the kind of the first pictures that we have started to kind of use these. He was one of my PhD students, and we have started to kind of to use one of these technologies. It goes back to something like 10 years ago, yeah. So we have started to kind of use this. So we are still expanding those technologies. One thing that you might realize here, that I was pretty much heavier here than I'm here right now. So I was working with drug users. I was something like 50 pounds heavier than I am right now. And I was working with drug users. We have been discussing about drug craving and how you control your drug craving. One of the patients told me that, okay, Dr. Akhtiari, you're doing a great job in this field. How can you control your own food craving when you are talking about controlling drug? I was thinking, okay, it's really hard. Okay, but I'm a doctor. Yeah, you are going to do that. It's not my kind of, so but I realized that it's a really, and I had a significant kind of health problem. I was not able to. I had a significant pain in my knees. I was thinking, oh, it seems that I need to think about some kind of change my behavior. So I accepted a PhD student, and we started to work to develop a weight reduction program based on what we have learned from drug users. And in the process of working on that PhD thesis, I lost 50 pounds. And as you can see here, it's something like 2009. And yeah, I lost 50 pounds. And I started to run and kind of, and if you know this, do you know him? Dr. McKinney, yeah. So yeah, we have been running together. So because I'm not still on that kind of fitness that Dr. McKinney has, but yeah, we are pretty much running together. And I ran the first time in my life 15K in Tulsa Run 2016. 1 hour, 34 minutes. Anybody in the class that has tried the Tulsa Run before? Oh, good. What is your record?
1 hour and 40 minutes.
1 hour and 40 minutes. Okay, good. So 1 hour is good. So 1 hour 34 is reasonable good. That was the first time that I did a 17K, 15K. And then 2018, I did that with 1 hour 22. And a few days ago, 1 hour and 20. So I'm still kind of running, and I'm trying to kind of improve my record. This year, Dr. McKinney, I think he did 1 hour and 17 minutes. So it was really good that yeah, he's much better than me, so I'm trying to kind of follow him. So, and I did my first marathon in Route 66 marathon. The first time that I did my marathon. And I'm running right now, but whenever I go, when I'm in Vancouver, when I'm in Tehran, when I'm in kind of Seoul, Sao Paulo, wherever in the world I go, I just run in different places, and I really enjoy doing that. I wrote a book about the experience of doing this, which we call the brain obesity, and discussing about the brain function, how you can use your brain function to reduce your weight, and that is what we try to do. And right now, I receive lots of feedbacks from the patients who are attending our program in terms of, okay, it seems that I wish that I was learning about my brain when I was in high school, when I was in the college. So I started to think about, okay, I can reform these educations for high school students or for college students or for those who are young and they really like to know what is happening inside the brain. So right now I'm developing a brain gym for resiliency. That's another kind of new program that we are developing. Those who are interested to know more about neuroscience for addiction medicine, I published a textbook about Neuroscience for Addiction Medicine. It has 37 chapters, something like 1,000 pages. It's pretty much an expensive textbook. So if you are interested to have a copy, kind of an e-copy, just send me an email. I will be happy to send you an e-copy from that book. And just some take-home notes, the last slide. First of all, It's really important for you to have a good understanding about the relationship between pleasure and dependence. And in reality, those networks that are inside your brain that are related to pleasure, and when you experience pleasure with those networks, you start to get dependent to anything that makes pleasure for you. They are designed in your brain to help you to have a happy life, to be able to have a family, to be able to have friends, and be dependent to your family members, and be dependent to your friends, and be attached to others emotionally. But the problem with drugs is those drugs would basically take over these networks, and they use the same love and passion that you have for your family, for your friends, for your significant others, for drugs. And the drug would be your only best friend. And that is the problematic part. And I always tell people that it's really good to have a good understanding about how pleasure would be happening inside, because you like to have a happy life. How pleasure would work inside your brain, and how you can use your brain in the best possible way to have a happy life. Meanwhile, be dependent, but dependent to those or people who are supposed to be your significant others around you. It's important for you to have a good understanding about the feature of dependency inside your brain. When you get dependent to something, you have a feeling of withdrawal. You have a feeling of craving. When you start to get dependent to people, you would start to get blinded about the side effects, the consequences. And that's important. If you have kids and you want to be able to kind of have a family life without being blinded, you cannot have a family life. You need to just kind of be blinded about some really kind of, there are good things in the life and there are bad things, and you need to be blinded on some of those things to be able to have a family life. That is a good aspect of dependency. But when you are using drugs, you would just be blinded to the side effects. You would have lack of control. And it's really important for you to know that right now, there is no single medication or single chemical agent that would make you happy without making huge amount of dependency and harm. So we do not have anything in place to play in that role, even giving you energy. So there is no medication or pharmacological agent that give you energy without making consequences. I believe that happiness is a trainable skill. So you can train yourself, you can learn how to use your brain to have a happy life. And it's really important for you to have a good understanding about what is happening inside your brain. That is the most important kind of message, I think, in the neuroscience class. That is not about just kind of going to the medical school. The neuroscience class could help you to learn about what is happening inside your brain. I need to thank my colleagues and collaborators that make this thing happening around. And I need to thank Naeem, who has done all the cartoons that we saw today. Thank you very much.